This is a Noise Marine. You've probably seen one of these before. And this is a Noise Marine on a display plinth. And you can probably tell that this plinth is rather poorly hiding a secret. Over the years, we've seen a lot of big old displays that hide speakers, generally used for things like Noise Marines. We've seen them with Bluetooth, we've seen them modelled into tanks, modelled to look like giant stages, all sorts of interesting things. But a lot of these solutions can be expensive, can require some fairly advanced electronic skills in order to produce, and can be a little prone to breaking. The solution I've got in mind today is, well, it's going to be quiet, it's going to sound quite tinny. But we're doing this for the memes, right? Not for it to be our new best audio source. And what I think is more important is that this method is very cheap on components, requires very little in the way of electronic skills, and is pretty indestructible, at least as near as you're going to get. To make this display plinth, you're going to need a resin display plinth, obviously, preferably a hollow 3D printed one, so you can snap away as much internal support as possible. I actually sell these on my website, which I will link in the description if you want to check out my ones. A 3.5mm audio extension cable, sometimes called an aux cord extension. You can snip the socket off in advance and expose the inner wires. You can also just buy 3.5mm sockets, but again, that might be a little bit harder to solder. You may find it a bit more difficult to solder components to wires than you do wires to wires. We'll need a tiny speaker. This one is from a Nintendo Switch, and you can get these for a pair for under $5 on eBay last time I checked. I will check this time as well, and I will link all of these things in the description. You'll want some lead-free solder, a tin of flux, and some optional electrical tape or a hot glue gun. One or the other will do, maybe even both. You'll also want something to cover the bottom when you're done. I'm going to use balsa wood, which I admit is not the tidiest thing to use, but you could also use plasticard, I happen to have ran out, or just card if you really don't care. And then there are some tools that you'll need, and with all of these things, the budget really does assume that you have the tools or can borrow the tools. You're going to want a cordless drill, and you're going to want that cordless drill to have a tiny little bit, a sort of medium-sized bit, and then a bit that's at least as wide as the barrel of your audio socket. You'll want a soldering iron. Mine has variable voltage, but any soldering iron will do for this. You'll want some cutters and a knife just for trimming up wires, exposing cores and that kind of thing. And a desk clamp is very handy. You can get around this by using those little crocodile clip things to hold your wires, but the desk clamp definitely does the best job because it'll also hold things firmly whilst you drill them, for example. The first thing I want to do here is drill out the big hole for the cable to go in. You'll have already noticed earlier that I started snipping out all the insides of my plinth and I cut a massive hole in the bottom. From here we want to drill a nice pilot hole first of all, which is what we need the medium bit for. We then use a bit that's sized appropriately to the audio socket to widen that hole out. Don't push the socket in just yet though, we have more prep to do before that. Next round to the opposite face, which will be the front, and this is where we're going to want to put just some holes for the speaker to let it sound out through. Since these are small, we can just drill them with the smallest drill bit, which again is what we needed that for. No need for pilot holes this time. Since they are small holes, they're not really going to stress the resin enough to crack it. Depending on what material your plinth was made of though, you may feel differently here. Right, next we need to wire up the speaker to the socket. These sockets, especially if bought cheap from the internet like I did, they can vary a lot in the colours used for the internal wires. But as a general rule, red and blue are usually left and right audio, and then whatever the remaining colour is will be ground. Although in this case, just to throw that off even more, blue was ground, which is awkward. We only need one of the audio channels for our mono version, but if you think that your plinth will fit 2 speakers inside, you can absolutely wire up a stereo setup here. Most of these jacks are stereo, and you'll just wire both ground wires of the speaker to the same ground wire on the jack. So you'll see that I've exposed the inner wires here, and the first thing I'll do is a process called tinning them. This will result in a tighter solder joint, so to do this, we just flux the strands and then introduce molten solder to them. There's a little connector on the Nintendo Switch speaker that has to get snipped off first, but then it's again the same process here to get it ready. Once it is ready, we can then solder our wires together. Red one to one of the audio channels, black to the ground. The remaining unused wire on the socket can just be squared away if you're only wiring up one speaker like I am. You can use hot glue, electrical tape, even heat shrink to do this. I end up using a combination of electrical tape and hot glue. Hot glue, you shouldn't really use it in proper electronics projects, but for something like this, it's a very simple and effective void fill, and we're probably not ever going to have to go back in and service this. So I wouldn't hold this to the same standards that I would hold a proper electronics product. With everything soldered up, we now need to squeeze it inside our plinth, and it's just a case of sort of finagling it into the hole we made in the bottom. We want to ensure that the socket is snugly in its hole and the speakers are pointing towards theirs. You'll again want to take the time just to make sure that no wires are exposed. Make sure that you've got some electrical tape on any exposed parts, or shrink wrap or hot glue, etc, etc. And then we can give this a test. Now, an audio output in mono is the absolute best choice here, but there's every possibility that isn't going to be available to you. If you do play stereo through it, just remember you'll only get one channel, but you can also use like your computer's mixer or something like that and just push all the sound over to the left or right audio channels, and it will do that appropriately. Once it's verified and working, and thank God this is, or I'd feel really silly, we can get it buckled up. Come to think of it, you should probably do this test before you hot glue all the wiring in. That's probably smarter for the money. Now, it is very quiet, and I kind of knew it was going to be very quiet. It's only a 1-watt speaker, and you could remedy this with some kind of preamp if you wanted to put more money and more electronics into it, and you can actually get preamps that are really tiny. You can get little electronic preamps that are designed to go into small circuits from eBay, and they're not expensive. So again, if you were wanting to push things here, you could go for 2 speakers, you could go for a preamp, and you could turn this into a proper, loud, decent sounding bit of kit. I just wanted you to show you the basics of how to get it done, basically. Covering the bottom is very simple. We're just going to cover the bottom. I just hot glued on some balsa wood here, and then I painted mine black afterwards just for a bit of neatness. You have options here. If you wish to paint it, paint it. If you wish to use a colour matched product, do that. Kind of do what you like for covering the bottom up, as long as you're happy with how it looks afterwards. And so that's my cheap, simple solution for putting speakers into plinths. Like I said, I will list the parts in the description so you can kind of see what the parts are and then figure out what this would cost you. For me, I already had pretty much everything on hand here. I had to buy a 3.5mm audio jack. So for me, it was a little bit cheaper than it probably will be for you, but you'll be able to work out the price. I'd expect to spend around £10 or under to do this mod if you had to buy most of the parts that you're going to need. So before we wrap up this video, let's take one last look at our Noise Marine, see what we think of him. I think he looks very handsome. I'm very happy with how he came out. The paint job I'm also very happy with, but you know, we've made a million different videos on different paint jobs on this channel, and I just thought it'd be nice to do something a little bit different. So here we are looking at this speaker base instead. If you liked it, folks, don't forget to give the video a thumbs up. You can also subscribe to the channel, you can turn on notifications, and if you really want to support the content and help me keep doing this full time, you can check out my Patreon link and my affiliate links in the description below. So with all that said, all that remains is for me to wish you happy hobbying. I do hope you'll try this one, and please do drop me a comment if you do try this one. I will see you in the next one, folks. Thanks for watching, and bye-bye for now.